Hello everyone, welcome to the news desk. Here is the bleary-eyed Randy Buehler. I think you probably did get some sleep, right?
Look, major props to Adam Styborski. Stibbs is actually the guy who looked at every deck list and put them all and made the pivot tables and all the stats. Stibbs. I kept going over and asking him for new stuff, and I think I owe him a beer. That's what I think.
All right, fair. So, we had a speculative look at Standard before we came in, and I guess the headline from that was, there might be 4 big decks.
3 or 4, yep.
Okay, so where do you want to start in terms of seeing what Real World actually did?
Yeah, let's look at the day one field, right? Let's look at everybody that showed up for the Pro Tour. This, some of these people scrubbed out, some of these people didn't know how to draft, some of these people are still around. This is the field, and the first thing, and one of the things we said yesterday, it is all about the mana. The fetch land, battle land mana base lets you do all kinds of crazy things. There's a lot of 4-color decks. There's dark Jeskai and blue Abzan, and the Megamorph decks are not just green-white, they're splashing red or they're splashing blue. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And when you get down at here's a list. What list is this? Is it Esper Planeswalkers? Is it Esper Control? Is it Esper Dragons? It's kind of tough. So we've got those stats. This is kind of our best stab at it. Atarka Red comes out on the top of this analysis. But in my opinion, this is not the best way to look at the field for day one. I actually think you can kind of roll things up and you can say, all right, our actual day one metagame breakdown, the one I keep referring back to, kind of rolls those things up.
All right, so let's do that. Let's do a little bit of data twisting and move from the complete day one field with lots of 2.5%ers to this. Here we go.
Right, so all the Jeskais, whether it's tokens or dark Jeskai or just the 3 colors, that is the most played deck in the field, just barely edging out the red aggro decks. So that's Atarka Red, that's red-green landfall, those sorts of decks kind of lumped together. And then, yeah, all the Megamorph decks, I mean, fundamentally, those are Den Protector, Deathmatch Raptor decks.
Sure.
The details can vary. The Esper ones are the particular ones where I think, that was very much a big deck this weekend. 4th on these stats, and it did pretty well, too, and starts kind of moving up a little bit. I mean, I think the top 3 were the 3 decks that people were expecting the most coming in. I don't know that people had Esper in 4th. I don't know what people had in 4th, honestly. It was kind of these are the 3 tentpole decks of the format, and we did see them. And then, most interestingly to me, we saw them almost flat-footed, tied, 18.8, 18.3, 17.4. Very much 3 big decks, but then, some Esper, some Abzan, and a whole mess of 4 and 5 color shenanigans.
Right, and I guess those big 3 then, the fact that they're so evenly split is indicative of a lot of testing teams going, you know what, there's not a pin to put between these, and we all, rather than 13 people on a team, 12 of them are on Jeskai, it's a 13-person team where 4 are on Jeskai, 6 are on Red Aggro, 3 are on Megamorph, and then on the next team, it's 5 are on Megamorph, 4 are on Red Aggro, 6 are on Jeskai, and so you almost kind of picked a style that you felt comfortable with.
Yeah, there's definitely some of that.
In the big 3.
I mean, there's some team decks too, and some of the teams are split on there's the beatdown players and there's the Esper players.
All right, so why don't we dig in a little bit into some of these decks then? Where do you want to start?
I think you got to start with Jeskai. I think that it is the deck people were expecting to be the most played. It is, although just barely, the deck that is in fact the most played. Yeah, I mean, you see all the mana pips up there. Again, all about the mana, right? Battle lands and fetch lands are, I think, the headline in this standard right now. It lets you put Mantis Rider and Crackling Doom in the same deck. And in fact, it lets you curve into those with a Jason's Prodigy on turn 2, maybe a Soulfire Grandmaster on turn 2. The deck has the ability to be aggressive, right? Mantis Rider actually hits pretty hard. Flying is actually pretty good. So it can be a very aggressive deck, but it can also be control-ish. It can sit behind a Jace. It can Ojutize command to bring back the Jace that you actually managed to kill right away. It got this flexibility that, I mean, a lot of people at the Pro Tour in particular really value in a deck that, depending on their draw, depending on their opponent, they can play a more control-ish game, they can play a more aggressive game.
A card that belongs in Jeskai, well, it's in the name apart from anything else, not on that list, Jeskai Ascendancy. And that's a card that Matej Zadelkai is certainly running, and that team, they're quite high on the tokens plan. So again, that's another shade of the Jeskai.
Yeah, no, Jeskai tokens, we've got split out. Jeskai tokens actually went 5 for 5 advancing people to day 2. I mean, it was basically their team put 5 players on Jeskai tokens, and I mean, the Eureka team put everybody through to day 2.
Sure.
So that does in fact include 5 of the 5 Jeskai tokens players.
All right, so we have Jeskai. Let's go a little narrower on the color spectrum. Let's go to red. What about red aggro?
Yeah, this is pretty interesting to me in that if you look at the day 2 advancement, it's actually the landfall versions that did better than the just, here's my creatures, here's my Atarka's command versions. So that guy on the end over there, McKindy Slide Runner, he's not in all of the decks. He tends not to be in the decks that we've labeled as Atarka red. He tends to be in the ones that we'd call red-green landfall. But yeah, that strategy did pretty well this weekend.
Now, Paolo Vida Rosa is playing red with some green, and he sort of described this as a combo deck,
right.
Almost, because of this. I start with a dude, and then I have a Become Immense, and then I have a Team of Battle Rage, and that's 14 points of double striking entertainment.
Yeah, I almost put Team of Battle Rage on the on the graphic.
Yeah.
I went with the Slide Runner just because I think the landfall is it's worth noting that there's this alternate take that doesn't overlap by, it's 10, 20 cards off, which is kind of interesting. But yes, it's got this Splinter Twin feel where you're playing this tempo game and you're kind of cagily attacking and playing around removal and trying to make sure that you don't lose to whatever they're up to. And then you're like, oh, you tapped out? Oh, Become Immense Team or Battle Rage. You're just dead.
Yeah. Outstanding stuff. So that's your red aggro. Where should we go next? Are we in land of Megamorph now?
I believe so.
All right, let's do that. Let's take a look at what's going on here as they unflip themselves.
Yeah, Gideon is the big new addition to this deck. But I mean, we talked to Michael Majors yesterday. I thought he did a great job with that deck tech, actually. If you really want to understand this deck, Michael Majors is one of the first guys to really show off the deck in this iteration of Standard anyway. Teammates with Brian Kibler, who built the sort of, intellectual predecessor of this deck in the last Standard season. It's a lot of value, a lot of incremental card advantage. Dramoka's Command's a great card. Gideon's a great card. Like I said, there were Bant versions and there were Naya versions. It's the 2-color versions that did by far the best.
Now, do you have a sense why? Because usually the answer to that would simply be, well, the mana was terrible, people got greedy. But we began this by saying mana is plentiful, mana is play as many colors as you want. So it shouldn't have been mana that was the issue.
I mean, I think part of it is the mana. I mean, you can do anything you want. Doesn't necessarily mean you should.
Yes, and we move from Magic to life. just right there for you.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, you can build a 4-color deck that does any 4 colors you want. You can build a 5-color deck. I think, though, that you're giving up a little bit of time. You're giving up the ability to have an aggressive draw. Your lands are going to come into play tap sometimes. And I think that, in particular with green-white, what you got for the splash wasn't worth what you gave up with the mana just coming into play a little bit slower.
Okay, so we've done Megamorph, we've done Red Aggro, we've done Jeskai. So now we come to that 4th deck that you said maybe people didn't have 4th on their radar.
Yeah, I thought this was coming in, there were 3 big expected decks. You look at the stats, clearly this is the 4th pillar of this format right now, is Esper. Now, it's not clear what the single best version of it is. You roll it up and you look at our analysis and it's, well, there's the controlled deck. Reed Duke has a very old school deck. He's just like counterspells, card drawing, and removal, right?
Majoring responders and things.
Right, but then you get some people who calling their deck Esper Super Friends. They're playing not just Jace, but Obnixilis and Gideon in those decks. Just, as many as a dozen Planeswalkers will show up in some of these lists.
Right.
Obnixilis showed up in multiple versions of the Esper deck, and another couple Battle for Zendikar cards that I think have helped this archetype. Painful Truths is showing up in a lot of these decks as a solid card drawing card, and Scatter to the Winds it's just a good, efficient counterspell.
Yeah, I'm really glad to see Converge doing something in Constructed, because one of our narratives from the limited rounds is that the Converge deck doesn't necessarily have a huge payoff yet, and there are plenty of Converge cards that people are playing with a little bit of Converge upside rather than it's a big deal. And it's just nice to see another new mechanic coming in and paying off. So Painful Truths.
Yeah, and an old mechanic too. I didn't mention it, but Esper Dragons is still here. I mean, you can still just Silumgar Scorn, Foul Tongue Invocation, Ojutai, right? That's still a deck.
Right. Okay.
Still a fine deck.
So 4 pillars of the format. If you have pillars, you must have things that aren't the pillars. So where do you want to go here?
Look, by far the most exciting deck yesterday was this Aristocrats deck. Christian Calcano has been the most visible guy playing this. He's blue-black Aristocrats. And I should explain the name, right? Aristocrats comes from the deck that Tom Martell won the Pro Tour with, where Aristocrats has become Magic slang for a deck that just wants to sacrifice everything, right? You turn a profit by eating all of your own creatures. And because the Cartel Aristocrat and the other, was so prominent in the deck that Martell won the Pro Tour with a couple of years ago, Aristocrats has just become this Magic slang. There aren't any actual Aristocrats in the deck, but
Indeed.
But that's the strategy here. That's where the name comes from. You can build two different versions of this. Nantuko Husk is the guy who's doing all the eating, right? That Nantuko Husk lets you, every creature you put into play can make that guy bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you have a way to get him through, like a Whirler Rogue is Calcano's tech, the green-black players are just collected companying to go super, super wide as well.
Get round the edges, sort of.
Precisely. So you play an Nantuko Husk, you have some way to get a whole bunch of other creatures into play. I think the blue-black version, in my opinion, it's better. It's a little more played. But I mean, the green-blacks the green-blacks went 2 for 2. Like, both the ones that showed up are, in fact, through to day 2. We saw Gabe Nassif playing that on camera yesterday.
Right. Yep.
He's one of those two. Calcano and a lot of the Target guys. It sounds like their version is actually a Pascal Maynard design.
Yeah, I think he was heavily involved in that.
But he chickened out and didn't play it. He was kicking himself on Twitter last night. He's got teammates that are like 5-0 and 4-1, and he's like, I chickened out. I didn't play my own brew.
Man. Okay.
But that's by far the most exciting deck. I certainly hope we can get the calculator in here to do deck tech for that today. That is certainly the plan.
All right, so look, here's the thing. It's all very well saying 367 decks came in, but if they're terrible, I could submit a list with 60 forests. That wouldn't be very good, but it'd still be part of the day 1 metagame.
Right.
So what counts is success. That's what people want to be playing with.
Completely
agree. Let's move to day 2 and get a sense of what's actually going on under the hood now that we're here on day 2.
You see Red Aggro kind of moved up a little bit. I mean, the landfall decks did better than the Atarka Reds, but they both did fine, and they actually do pip Jeskai as the most played deck in this field. I mean, the top 3, more of just that shuffle, right? Megamorph was 3rd, it's still 3rd. Interestingly, with the Megamorph, you look at the advancement percentage on the right, which is always the stat that I find the most interesting here. Only 59% Megamorph, but the 2-color version is 70%. The Naya version is 45, and the Bant version is 33% advancement. So if it was just green-white, you'd actually look better on the advancement there. And then, yeah, you see Esper is the best performing deck we've got here. Over 70% of the Espers put together. Yeah, this is our last slide. Okay. So we've got these advancement percentages are just super interesting to me.
Yep. I love the fact that Esper has such a huge advancement percentage, and I do wonder whether that's no one plays Esper by mistake. Anyone who plays Esper is like, I love countering spells, I love sweeping the board, I know what to do with Planeswalkers, and it's a very strong choice. Esper players tend to be like, I'm Esper unless you stop printing white and blue and black cards.
And look, honestly, I mean, Esper tends to be the thing that Pro Tour veterans gravitate toward.
Right.
You don't know, for example, whether those Esper players could all be really good drafters. Like, that is mixed up in those stats. So you look at those stats, and that is player advancement percentage. It's 5 rounds of constructed. Can't advance without winning some constructed matches, but it could be that you 3-0'd your draft, and hypothetically, you could have won forward.
Yes.
That said, I did look also at the metagame for players who were at least 6-2 yesterday to try to see what's the winners metagame, those top 40 decks. It didn't change appreciably. I didn't sort of put those stats together just because, yeah, that day 2 metagame, that is your breakdown. That's what we got going on.
So there we are. We have 4 pillars of the format, and if you want to go rogue, well, then you get to go Whirler Rogue. It's going to be great fun as we head down the stretch here in Standard at Pro Tour Battle for Zendikar.